Hello, everybody. I wish I could see you. It's bizarre talking to myself, but nevertheless, I've done it before and I'll do it tonight. We're going to talk about feeling isolated right now, and in a time of great uncertainty, I'm going to tell you that the solution is being mindful. So for a little while now, before we get back to COVID, I want to talk to you about mindfulness. To make this all clear to you, I want you to play along for a little while. That'll give you the experience of what I'm talking about, the feeling of mindlessness. That'll lead us to the power of possibility so we can stop using yesterday's solutions to solve today's problems. Okay, so first I want you to add these numbers out loud. I'm going to show you the number and say it even if you're alone in the room. That's 1,000 plus 40 is 1,040 plus 1,000, 2,040 plus 30, 2,070 plus 1,000, 3,070 plus 20, 3,090, 4,090 plus 10. Now I can't hear you, and it's okay because you're alone in your room, but I'm sure the large majority, if not all of you, said 5,000. But if you take out a little pencil and you write down 4,090 plus 10, you get 4,100. All right, this happens all the time. Typically, we're not aware of the mistakes we're making. We just go on and assume we're correct. But the data that I'm going to provide for you, the story I'm going to tell you, is that we're all the time, all right? You don't know when you're mindless because when you're mindless, you're not there to know you're not there. But I have a lot of data supporting this idea. So what do? It's very warm out now, but as winter is coming, you're in your car, the car starts to skid on ice. What most of you, all of you over 50 will probably say, what you do is you gently pump the brakes to regain control in the car. Well, that was fine in the past. It turns out now with what you need to do is firmly press the brake. So the point is, we learned initially one way of doing things. We don't change the way we're doing them. We just keep doing it. Things around us are changing. And even though we learned how to drive on ice for safety's sake, now is likely to cause us accidents. And the point is that mindlessness isn't stupidity. Again, we learn at time one, we freeze our understanding, forget or are oblivious to the fact that things are changing. And then we don't get to take advantage of us or to avert the danger not yet arisen. So no matter what you're doing, whether you're giving a webinar, listening to a webinar, eating a sandwich, drinking a glass of beer, as Victoria suggested, playing golf, no matter what, you're doing it either mindfully or mindlessly. And the consequences of being in one state of mind or the other are enormous. Now, I'm an academic, as you were told, so I can't, in something written, say what I really feel. So it says here, most of our suffering. Let me tell you and the other 10 million people I've said virtually all, I don't mean virtually all of our suffering, whether it's personal, interpersonal, professional, or global, is the direct or indirect effect of our mindlessness. It's a big statement. And I've been studying this for over 40 years. And study after study, we increase mindfulness and we get measurable and measurable benefits to our competence, productivity, our well-being, our health. We have 4 studies showing that when we make people more mindful, they live longer. The consequences are enormous. Some of the findings, just a handful of findings that we've gotten over the years. I promised Anne I wouldn't talk for more than 3 hours, so I'm not going to go over each of these. All right, so what do I mean by being mindless? Here you'll have some ideas when you're acting like a robot. We have expressions on automatic pilot, and so on. It's when the past is over-determining the present. You're relying on things you learned in the present and are completely unaware of change. You're trapped in a single perspective, and of course you're oblivious to that fact. You're insensitive to context, and you follow rules and routines blindly. You're governed by these rules and routines, these ways of doing things that you learned at time one, like gently pump the brakes. The important thing is the other side of this, being mindful. This is incredible. It is so easy, it almost defies belief. Remember, I said if you do this, you'll live longer, the neurons are firing, people are going to find you more attractive. It leaves its imprint in the things that we did measure that I put in where we haven't found improvements when you simply notice new things. Now, you don't notice new things when you think you know. If you accept that uncertainty is the rule, it's not the exception. Everything is always changing. Everything looks different from different perspectives. So we never really know. So there's reason to tune in. Now, when you're mindful, actively noticing new things, that puts you in the present. It's very sweet. People say be in the moment, but it's an empty suggestion because you're not there to know you're not there. This is the way to be there. Simply notice new things about the things that you thought you knew best, the things that are most familiar. When you do that, you're in the present, you become sensitive to context and perspective. You can still have rules and routines, but they guide what you're doing. They don't overdetermine what you're doing. And the phenomenological experience of this is the experience of engagement. And the point is that this active noticing is what you're doing when you're most excited. This active noticing that's so good for you feels good for you and is easy. Okay, so you notice novelty, and that leads you to pay more attention to the thing that you're noticing. All right, so far, we know mindlessness is pervasive. You thought the numbers added up to 5,000. You were about to cause accidents when you're skidding on ice, and so on. Virtually all of us are mindless most of the time. We think we know, but we don't. An easy way of understanding this is that we're frequently in error, but rarely in doubt. So now our mindfulness are astounding because all of our facts become suspect. This story I've told many times. I was at this horse event many, many years ago, and this man asked me if I'd watch his horse, because he was going to go get his horse a hot dog. Well, as Victoria told you, I'm Harvard, Yale all the way through. I know that's ridiculous. Horses are herbivorous. They don't eat meat. He came back with the hot dog, and the horse ate it. And it was at that moment that I realized everything I thought I knew could be wrong. Now, science that so many of us pay attention to is based on probabilities. All of our facts, by the way, are simply decisions from a particular perspective based on limited information. And science is no different. If you ran the exact same study, which we can never do, but even if we could, the findings say that you're likely to find whatever they found. Those are translated by journalists, textbook writers, people giving talks, teachers as absolute. When you know something absolutely, you don't question it. All right, so I'm going to ask you, how much is 1 and 1? Now, I have already scared you, so I know you're not going to answer. But had you not been this with that question, you'd all say 2. But I'm going to tell you no. That if you're using a base 10 number system, 1 plus 1 is 2. If you're using a base 10 number system, 1 plus 1 is written as 10, but easier to understand for most of us. If you add 1 wad of chewing gum to 1 wad of chewing gum, 1 plus 1 is 1. 1 pile of laundry to 1 pile of laundry, 1 plus 1 is 1. 1 bunch of flowers to 1 bunch of flowers, 1 plus 1 equals 1. And the real one may not equal 2 as often as it does. The point is, we don't know. Now, not knowing can be stressful when we think we should know. And so when we don't know something, what many of us tend to do is to pretend. We think we should know, so we make believe, or we just leave the circumstances. And what I'm trying to explain to you is that you want to change from this personal attribution of unknowing, I don't know, but you may know, to a universal attribution. Nobody knows. Uncertainty is the rule. Uncertainty is our friend, as I hope the rest of this talk will convince you. Moreover, we have to understand that valences are in our head cause stress. It's our views of events that cause stress. Things are neither good nor bad. It's the way we frame them that leads them to be good or bad. So let's say Victoria and I go out to dinner and the food is wonderful, that's great. Victoria and I go out to dinner and the food is awful, that's great. I'll eat less and that'll be better for my waistline. All right, so how we experience things depends on how we talk to ourselves. How we talk to ourselves depends on our mindfulness. Let's turn to stress. Most people are suffering stress because there seems to be so much uncertainty. The uncertainty is not greater now. We never know. So let me tell you an exercise I do with my advanced decision-making class at Harvard. I tell them, look, I've taught a version of this course for about 40 years, and I've never missed a class. What is the likelihood that I'm going to be here next week? Let me go around the room. Remember, these are Harvard students. They're not going to say 100%. They say silly things like 96 or 99% as if they did some calculation. I'll say, I'll be there next week. Now I say, okay, what I want you to do is each give me a plausible reason why I might not be here next week. And we go around the room. Invariably, the first person says, well, you've never missed a class, you deserve the time off. The next one says, you got a flat tire. The next one says, your dog had to go to the vet, and it goes on and on. Now I say to them, what is the likelihood that I'm going to be here next week? And the 100% answer drops to 50%. Predictability is an illusion. It's easy looking back and it makes sense. It's very different from actually predicting going forward. And a lot of our stress comes from this idea of predicting. Many people during this time, I think, have an attitude of defensive pessimism. Defensive pessimism is expect the worst and hope for the best. And I take issue with both parts of that. You tend to get what you expect. Remember, if our stress is a function of our views, and now we're expecting the worst, and things can be good or bad, but we're only seeing them as bad, we're increasing our stress. Hope. Everybody thinks hope is good. Well, it's certainly better than being hopeless. But think about it. You wake up in the morning and you go to the kitchen to get coffee. You're not hoping you're going to get coffee. Hope has built into it also the possibility of failure. So I'm going to suggest a different strategy, the strategy of mindful optimism. You don't put your head in the sand, you make a plan. So you're going to wear masks, you're going to wash your hands, you're going to practice social distancing, and then you go about your business. And you're living moment to moment. And in doing this, you're stronger, so more resourceful should something eventually occur. And we can't predict whether or not it will. Now, I was asked to talk about loneliness, and it's interesting because I think the times in my life that I felt the loneliest were not when I was cut off from people, but rather when I was in a relationship that was no longer fulfilling. You can be lonely in a relationship or with people, and you can be happy by yourself. It all depends on, again, how we talk to ourselves about this and our willingness to mindfully engage. And you're mindfully engaged, excitement of that mindful engagement. And as I said here, I'll get back to this. Now my hallmark moment, which is to remember that life only consists of moments. So if we make the moment matter, then our life, our day, the hour, and so on will matter. I don't have data yet on mindfulness and COVID-19, but we're doing research on it right now. But my view is the more mindful we are, the less likely we are to get the virus. You know, I compare an Olympic athlete with a couch potato. It just says to me, she's in more trouble than the others and would recover faster and more successfully if she got COVID, right? So there are things that we can do even when we're in our house. But you'll surprise at some of the things I'm going to suggest in a little while. I want to switch to, rather than talk about COVID, to just talk about the psychology of possibility, because it's going to be relevant to all of I want to ask us, or you, why you're so sure we can improve vision beyond 2020. Think yourselves thin, reverse virtually all brain damage, and cure ourselves if we should get COVID-19. Why are we so sure we can't live a stress-free life, whether at home or at work or working at home? We need to free ourselves from the constricting mindsets and the limits they place on us. So to do this, I want to suggest to you a new view of health. And to suggest this new view of health, first I'm going to appeal to dead white men. So the first is Schopenhauer. Schopenhauer said, all read through three phases. First, it's ridiculed. Second, it's violently opposed. And third, it's accepted as self-evident. Einstein said, if an idea isn't absurd, then there's no hope for it. So what is this idea? It's so simple. I want to tell you that mind, body, these are just words. If we put the mind and body back together, wherever we're putting the mind, we're necessarily putting the body. Right? And I want to show you now some of the unusual studies that we did to test this mind-body unity. A famous study, a counterclockwise study, and I can say it's a famous study because it turns out if you watch The Simpsons Go to Havana, they describe the study. We did this back in 1979. We took old men and had them live in a retreat that was retrofitted to 20 years earlier. They talked about things in the from the past, watched movies, TV shows of the past, but they did so in the present tense. All right, for them it was 20 years earlier. We had retrofitted this timeless retreat to set up almost as a Hollywood set, although not as classic. All right, so for them, it was 20 years earlier. We took lots of measures before we started, and then measures at the end of 1 week, or I think it might have been even 5 days. What we found with those in that earlier place, these are men in their 90s. It's interesting also that back in 1979, 90 for us, now we would see it as the new 70, but then 90 was 90. Once COVID started, 70 now feels like the new 90, but they were old is all the takeaway is. They're old and they're living in this retreat as their younger selves. As a result, their hearing improved, their vision improved, their memory improved. Their strength. Photographs of the men before and then after. We showed them to people who knew nothing about the study and asked them to evaluate them. And they also looked significantly younger. Truth be told, not 20 years younger, but younger nonetheless. Now, fast forward, 2007, we did this research with chambermaids. And we said, okay, how much exercise do you get? And they said they don't get exercise because exercise is what they think you do after work, and they're just too tired from all their work. So we take these and we teach them that their work is exercise. Making a bed is like working on this or that machine at the gym, and so on. So all we do is change their mindset to see their work as exercise, right? Again, we took lots of measures to start. We find that after this, they weren't eating any differently. They weren't working any harder. So we're pretty sure that all that change was their mindset. However, as a result of the change in mindset, they lost weight. There was a change in body mass index. Waist to hip blood pressure came down. We have lots of studies with diabetes. One, we have people with type 2 diabetes show up. We take all of the measures. We have them sit down next to a computer and they're going to play computer games. We have a clock next to the computer. And we ask them to change the game they're playing every 15 minutes or so. That's just to ensure that they look at the clock. For a third of the people, the clock is going twice as fast as real time. For a third of the people, the clock is going for a third of the people, the clock is going real time. What we find was that blood sugar level followed perceived rather than real time. We have enormous control over our body. People don't realize. This one is amazing, I think. Colds. People come in, we give them all sorts of measures. The experimental group is going to watch a video, giant screen, and on the screen are people coughing and sneezing. The room is surrounded with props to prime a cold, chicken soup, tissue you could think of. without the introduction of a virus, no rhinovirus, none of the cold viruses, they got sick. We have a sleep study. People go to sleep, they wake up, they see a clock. The clock tells them they got 2 hours more sleep than they got, 2 hours fewer, or the amount of sleep they actually got. Cognitive and physiological functions seem to follow perceived amount of sleep rather than real sleep. Let me turn to one that's a little different. So each of these studies is similar in some way to a placebo. Your mind thinks the pill will work, the body then cooperates. So you've already realized that I'm a little strange. You go to the doctor's office to read the Snelling eye chart, and probably all you do is call out the letter that's pointed to. For me, I get annoyed because the chart is set up to say, soon you're not going to be able to see. So I thought about this, and what we did was reverse the chart. Now the expectation is, soon I will be able to see. And you know, when we do that, people are able to see what they couldn't see before. Most people have trouble seeing the way down the chart. So what we did is we started the chart a third of the way down. So now 2/3 of the way down, we're going to be much smaller letters. And again, people could see what they couldn't see before. This whole idea of being given a number for how you see feels bizarre to me. That if I'm hungry, I can see that sign, the restaurant sign, much further away than if I'm not hungry. I see better at 11 o'clock in the morning than I do at 7 o'clock at night. And the point is, nothing stays still, everything is always changing. Yet the medical world, in some sense by necessity, has to freeze because you're only there at one moment. Talks in the distant past, I would ask people, is there anyone in the audience who knows their cholesterol level? And somebody would be waving their hand, very proud. And the one who waves the most, I say, okay, and what is your cholesterol level? And the person would give a number. And I'd say, that's nice. When did you have it measured? And they'd say 4 or 6 months ago. And I'd say, and you haven't eaten or exercised since? And I say, if you never get it measured again, you'll die a healthy person. The point is that these numbers, just as most of the things that we learn, horses don't eat meat, 1 and 1 is 2, we hold things still, and control over all aspects of our lives comes from letting things more naturally vary. All right, so for most of us, the likelihood of getting the virus is very small. But what if we do get it? Suggest a powerful psychological treatment where we can, in a sense, self-administer a placebo. So this is about attention to symptom variability, which is just a fancy way of saying being mindful. All right, we've done this work with people who are stressed, depressed, have multiple sclerosis, Parkinson's, chronic pain, arthritis, mild cognitive impairment, ALS, stroke. We're doing it right now with COVID-19, but I don't have data on that yet just to report. What happens is that, let's take stress as an example. Stress, think they're stressed all the time. Or in pain, you think you're in pain. Nobody is anything all the time to equal measure, right? We only notice when we have the symptoms. So if I think I'm stressed all the time or in pain all the time, when I'm not in pain or stressed, I'm just living my life. And then it comes back, and I remember only the last time that it was present. The key to our health is actually to notice when we don't have the symptoms. So we do something very simple, and you can do this yourself, set your iWatches or have a friend call you or whatever. What we did was to contact people at random throughout the week and simply ask them, how are you now in the particular symptom? And is it better or worse than before? And why? Well, 3 things happen when you do that. The first, you realize, gee, I'm not stressed or in pain to equal measure all the time, so you feel better. The second thing, by initiating a search for why now is it different, that's mindful. And as I said before, that when we're mindful, it's active noticing, the neurons are firing, it's literally and figuratively enlivening. So answering that question, looking for our health. And finally, you're much more likely to find a solution to something if you're looking for the solution. All right, now the same approach can be used for feeling lonely, feeling isolated, feeling anything. That if you're feeling isolated and you're lonely, you're not feeling isolated and lonely all the time. So when are you feeling this way? And when you're not feeling this way, what are you doing? So you started reading a good book, or you are on Skype, on Zoom, listening to a webinar, whatever it was. I mean, right now, I doubt that any of you are feeling isolated or lonely. All right, so it's a suggestion as to how to deal with this. Things are changing, always changing. And what we do is we confuse the stability of our mindsets with the stability of the underlying phenomenon. We think things are staying the same, but it's our minds that are keeping it still. What we want to do is, rather than have this illusion of stability, we want to exploit the power in uncertainty. Idea that the limits we assume are real must exist at all. With only subtle shifts in our thinking and expectations, we can begin to change the ingrained behaviors that zap health, competence, optimism, and vitality from our lives. And for another hallmark moment, we want to live each day as if it's our whole life. So let me conclude by saying, if we increase our mindfulness, we increase our effectiveness, our health, and our well-being. And thank you, and I'm happy.
All right, thank you so much, Ellen. Not sure if you guys can see me or not. My name is Nathan Duclos-Rickard. I am the one of the biology teachers at New Bedford High School, so I'll be fielding your questions tonight. Again, you can feel free to throw those right into our chat box. If you go to the very bottom of your screen, click on the chat in the middle, and you can type your questions right in there for us. Our first question for the evening comes from, sorry if I say your name wrong, Jason Potvin. The question is, how are singles affected during COVID versus other population groups?
Well, you know that if you're at the age where you're expecting to find a significant other, someone to marry, clearly it's going to put a damper on that. On the other hand, what you're doing is, if you're meeting over Skype or Zoom, WhatsApp, or any of these other platforms, you get a chance to actually know each other, know things that might be more important to the success of a relationship. So yes, it's different, but it's not necessarily better or worse. To meet somebody is to go to some bar, or have some face-to-face interaction. You're going to be disappointed. But that's what I'm saying. We have to question, why do we believe that that's the way to meet somebody? You have cultures where what they do is have marriages that are planned. That you don't get to choose your partner. And it turns out that those marriages are as successful as the marriages where you go through a choosing process. So there are many ways to enjoy and explore relationships during this time.
All right, thank you. Our next question is from our one of our co-hosts, Victoria. Research tell us about what happens to a psyche when facing sudden, shocking change.
Well, Victoria, what I tried to say is that we're not facing sudden change. What we're doing is waking up to the realization that things were always changing. So if you say, what did your psyche do a year ago? That's what your psyche should be doing now. You need to talk to yourself differently and understand that things were always unpredictable. Did we predict, 15th president? Did we predict more recently that Trump would get in the White House? Things have always been and will always be unpredictable. That's the success of the stock market. You have those who believe it's going to go up and those who believe it's going to go down. If everybody believed it was only going in one direction, we couldn't run the risk of losing all our money in the same way. So I think the important thing is for us to recognize that Uncertainty, whether we like it, it is an inherent part of our lives. And what I'm suggesting is that if we recognize we can control our appreciation, understanding, experience of outcomes, then we don't have to be afraid of it. That, you know, as I said with the silly example about going to dinner, the food is good, great. The food is bad, great. I won't gain any weight. No matter what happens, there's a way of looking at it. And it's a prospective way of being, so it's not rationalizing.
Right. Again, I apologize if I mispronounce some of these names. Our next question is from Srahan. Are there right mindfulness and wrong mindfulness? Can mindfulness be right or wrong?
Yeah, no. I don't think so. I mean, I think that we should be mindful virtually all the time. The only time we should be mindless is if we found the very best way of doing things and nothing changes. And of course, I believe that's not possible. So I think if you're going to do it, you should be there for it, whether it's brushing your, you reach for cereal. And one might think that, why do I have to pay attention? And you pour the cereal in the bowl. And when the cereal was made, it turns out the people who are working at the factory, not a cashew, a metal nut fell into the bowl. And you're not there and you break a tooth. That if you're going to do it, and if you actively notice, it's actually engaging, whether it's pouring the cereal, brushing your teeth, no matter what. All of these things that we've taken for granted, which, by the way, make being at home alone harder because we don't pay attention to any of these things. And each of these things can be exciting, more so than one might think. I explain to people that drawing a distinction is a distinction. Distinctions. So if you were a chambermaid and your whole job was changing the linens in motels and hotels, and if you only saw it as changing the bed, taking the sheet off, putting another one on, sure, that could be boring. However, if you paid attention to the creases in that sheet, and you have a dime store novel, a very sexy show right in front of you, you can tell as you become expert at it who's slower in that bed, what they did in that bed. You don't learn this right away, but if you just dismiss it as making a bed. So the simplest things can become enlivening for us if we don't assume there's only one way to see them. I think there was another part of Singe's question, which I'm going to use it as an opportunity, even if it wasn't what you had in mind. But people often ask me, what's the difference between meditation and this mind that I study? I did very early research in the early 80s on meditation, and it's fine. But meditation sets you up for post-meditative mindfulness. So it's different. It's not mindfulness in itself. And, it's sort of, if you wanted to go to Paris and you flew and I took a boat, once we're in Paris, we're in the same place, but a different way to get to basically the same place. So mindfulness, as I study it and talk about it, it's not something where you take yourself out of the ongoing situation. It's where, in some sense, you throw yourself more in and you look at it this way and you look at it that way. And I can say something about being judgmental if somebody asks me, because I could just go on for a while. So Nathan, why don't you ask me? Okay, I'll answer the question you haven't asked.
All right. We got a lot of questions coming in, so we're gonna keep moving here. Can you please explain, sorry, this is from Shinsing Kim. Can you please explain the difference between needs versus mindlessly sticking to them?
Yeah, sure. That if you're mindfully using a routine, you say, well, I'll sort of do it this way. So let's say you're taught that the way you're supposed to hold a tennis racket is like this. All right. So you start off, you pick up the tennis racket and you hold it that way. But now if you didn't sleep well and your shoulder hurts, you probably shouldn't hold the racket the same way. as you did when your shoulder doesn't hurt. You need to adjust it. But people don't do that adjusting. They stick first learned it. Okay, so it's approaching life, and it could be sort of, it would seem like we should go forward this way, perhaps rather than this is the way you do it. Period.
All right. Our next question is from Tina Badakhshan. What is one of the best ways to track our progress in mindfulness building process?
Well, I think that the easiest way for us to become mindful, the first thing is, you walk out the door and you notice 5 new things. And when you're on the phone with something, notice 5 new things about their voice. And whatever you're doing, do it different ways. Look for different solutions. Many people won't use it until they become upset with something. And all of a sudden you say, well, wait a second. Ellen Langer says there's another way for me to look at this. And I can say to you, oh, Nathan, I can't believe how gullible I was, and take myself to task. Now, if I recall this webinar, I might say to myself, well, how else might I look at that? Because nobody misbehaves going forward intentionally. Actor's perspective. Well, I was being trusting, not gullible. I was being flexible, not inconsistent. I was being spontaneous, not impulsive. I got in the thing I wanted you to ask me before. And the point is that when we recognize that behavior makes sense from the actor's perspective, we come to see that there's an equally potent but oppositely valenced alternative for every negative characterization. And similarly, for there's a way of turning it around. And so the way, I don't know, marking your progress, but if everything is fine, and you just go about your business, then as soon as it's not fine is the way for you to start doing this. And the more you do it, the more you'll feel it's easy to do. And then talk about it with other people. Period.
Our next question is from Alexandria Matthews. Can you suggest some resources to learn more about using mindfulness in everyday life? Big one.
An opportunity for a plug. I said the first thing to do is 12 books on mindfulness. Start with the book Mindfulness. It's 25-year anniversary edition. And I think that much of what's out there is really about meditation, and that's fine also. It's just very different from what I'm talking about. So if you read, you don't have to buy the book, take it out of the library and look in the table of content, the references, and you'll see lots of things.
All right, our next question is from Andrew Kiriluda. Can you be multidimensional mindful, thinking about 2 or more events in the present, even though the events are not connected?
Is this Andrew, the physicist? Okay, so Andrew, why don't you ask me this during a lab meeting? So can you attend to several things at once? I think it depends on how you're attending to them. So he did some research a while ago about multitasking, where you're always told don't multitask. And I think most other pieces of advice is wrong-headed, that it depends on how you're multitasking. You're always multitasking. So right now, I'm thinking about Andrew, I'm looking at Nathan, I'm using my hands, and I'm talking. So I'm doing many things. So it depends on how you organize these things. If they seem extremely different, it's going to be hard to attend to both of them at the same time. I think when I say that it's important to be mindful all the time, I'm not suggesting that one should be mindful of everything, but I am suggesting that we should be mindless with respect to nothing all of the time. So you should be in a state of, gee, I don't know, or I'm looking at it in these many different ways.
All right, we've got another question from Saran. Oh, I just lost it. Forgive me. Does mindful optimism mean understanding the reality?
Reality is a funny word. You know, I don't know whose reality. Many people who are mindless think that the way they see the world is the only way. I see virtually everything, and so it would depend on the context. So, what remind me what the question was about multiple realities?
That was the question before about our
Multidimensional was the question before.
It's okay. Does mindful optimism mean
Yeah. Yeah,
understanding?
so optimism. So optimism can also be is as real or mindless as pessimism, or good nor bad. Our thoughts make it good or bad. Now you can make a decision, as I've done in my life, implicitly and then explicitly, that when something happens, it's just easier for me now, and certainly more soothing for me to see the upside of it. But the downside, you know, as I said, I personally am very trusting. That's great. Or I'm personally, that's not great. You know, you have to remember that evaluations, again, are in our heads, not in the things we're evaluating.
All right. Our next question is from Mary Ellen Boyle. Can you speak a little bit more about what is the connection between mindfulness and meditation?
Yeah, well, all right. So when you meditate, what you do is you focus on a word, a breath, you know, your mantra, and that as thoughts come in, thought, you're supposed to just let it go. And over time, that teaches you that it's just a thought. So in our way of dealing with this, you know, you have a thought, you attack it. You know, you see it this way, that way. So then, you know, you're worried you're going to lose your job. Okay. Think of 4 reasons why you might not lose your job. And think of 5 benefits if you actually do lose your job. So you started off, you were stressed, thinking, I'm definitely going to lose my job. This awful thing is definitely going to happen. And then after you go through our kind of thinking, you end up, maybe it'll happen, maybe it won't. And if it happens, there'll be ways that I can see it as a good thing. So it's, in some sense, it's a more active approach, but the assumption is at the end of the day, you end up in pretty much, and I've talked to people about this before, how meditation actually leads you to be less judgmental. I think people say, I don't want to be judgmental. So what they're going to do is think you're an idiot and not show it, you know, or however they're disparaging you. And that part is very different. In our scheme, you become non-judgmental by recognizing that that thing that you're taking apart is actually an asset from another perspective. So I'm not inconsistent. As I said, I'm flexible. I'm not impulsive. I'm spontaneous. And we did a study that was great fun many, many years ago. We said to people, gave them a list of behaviors and characteristics and said, circle those things about yourself that you want to change, you keep trying to change, but you're not. I would circle impulsivity. Now you turn the sheet over, and in a mixed up order of the positive versions of each of these words. Now the task is circle those things you really value about yourself. Spontaneity. So the reason I can't be less impulsive is because I value being spontaneous. The reason I can't be less gullible is because I value being trusting, and so on. And so it leads us then to be, you know, you might want to change me from being less, want to make me less trusting, and so on. And so judgments just fall by the wayside, or wherever judgments fall.
All right, our next question comes from Sally Fuller. What about real tragedy, such as a young person with terminal cancer? How can mindfulness help with those situations?
Yeah, well, in several ways. I mean, first, we've done some research with cancer, and, you know, I don't want to talk too much about that yet. It's for the patient. I think that the first thing that I say to people when they're undergoing something horrific like that is, and both for the parent and the child, for instance, if the child has cancer or vice versa, is if this is your last month alive, is this the way you want to spend it? Now, an odd thing is that it's when people are given a diagnosis of cancer or they have a stroke or something like that, is the first time many people actually fully come alive and realize, oh my goodness, there are all those things I've wanted to do that I have. Then, if you're going through this right now, this won't feel good, but if you're not, in an abstract way, is to recognize that, well, if somebody dies, it always feels tragic. We will all die at some point. And that for the person who has died, they're not in any pain any longer. So the crying and the sadness is of our own loss, which is very real. And I'm not saying we should make light of it. When we lose somebody that we care deeply about, we tend to incorporate parts of them, and we can still talk to them because you really only know somebody through your thoughts anyway. So I lost my mother when she was 57, and for the longest time I knew just what she would say to this or that thing, so I was able in some way to still have conversations with her. And then you become more like that person, and then the pain lessens. But if you want to say that there are some extreme situations, and my students do this to me, I say everything cuts both ways. I say, okay, you're in a cabin, you have your whole family, everybody you've ever cared about, people come in, they start shooting you, cut off heads, raping the women. I say, okay, look, nobody would believe it. Let's just say that I'm talking about all the other circumstances that we experience in our mundane lives. Most of us fret and worry about things that probably are not worth the time. So we'll leave it at that, that if you're dealing with cancer right now, you have my sympathy. It's difficult. But for everything else, I think that there are ways, if there is a loss, then we can talk about that privately, about how to deal with it. But being more mindful will always be helpful.
All right, thank you. Next question is from Ellen Noble. Do you for mindfulness from any spiritual teachings or traditions?
No, it's very interesting that I was developing all of these thoughts totally oblivious, this is over 40 years ago, to Eastern philosophy and so on. And then students of mine would point it out, and I would be thrilled to say, well, here I came to these conclusions from a Western scientific perspective, but they fit so nicely with these ancient traditions. So, by the time I had everything reasonably fully developed of all of this, and so all it did was please me rather than inspire me, let's say, to change some major way I was thinking about things.
All right. Next question is from Catherine Hunter. Can you please describe your research on the impact of COVID?
Well, we don't have the research yet. I was suggesting that you have lots of diseases that the medical world says are uncontrollable. And I've never believed that, because as I use the couch potato versus the Olympic athlete example, that if we strengthen only, that's going to help whatever ailment we might have. The research that we're doing on COVID is the attention to symptom variability. And we've just begun. So, in a couple of months, I may have more information. And if you're concerned, just send me an email, and I'm happy to let you know what we found or didn't.
All right.
But the diseases that we have information about are very varied. Psychological things like depression and Parkinson's, mild cognitive impairment. And just think about mild cognitive impairment. So people think you don't remember anything. Everybody remembers something. And once the caretaker and you, the caretaker in particular, recognizes there are things that you are remembering, and ask, well, why do you remember these and not the others? Then taking care of you becomes more exciting and meaningful to them. My father suffered from this, and I remember playing gin with him. And I'm saying to myself, I don't know, should I let him win? Would it be good for him if I let him win, or should I just play it honestly? And while I'm having this conversation with myself, he says gin, and he won. So that attention when people have chronic illnesses, chronic problems, to all that's bad. And again, the solution, I think, is recognizing the things that are working.
All right. Natalia Meyer would like to ask, is there research on correlation of time of the day with mindset of concentration?
There's some data that says there are night people and there are morning people. We're doing some research where we're telling them that they're night people and randomly telling them they're morning people. So you'd have those who are morning or night people and those who now think that they're the opposite, and so on. And we don't have much data, but what we have so far suggests that if you believe you're a morning person, you assert yourself in the morning, and if you believe you're an evening person, you do the same in the evening. So, I don't want to, well, I believe that strongly, but I can't argue it strongly yet because we don't have enough data. But again, remember my body unity is that you can change virtually anything by your thoughts. Now, can you take a bone that's broken and heal the bone? Probably not with your thinking that quickly, but I must say, I was on the this aging committee at the Harvard Medical School many years ago. Jack Rowe was the chair. I called him one day and I said, Jack, how long does it take for a broken finger to heal? And he said so, or maybe he said 10 days, whatever he said. And I said, well, what would you say if I said I could heal it through psychological means in 5 days? He said, okay. I said, what about 4 days? He said, all right. I said, what about 3 days? And he said, no. I said, okay, what about 3 days, 23 and a half hours? I mean, what is the point where here you can and here you can't? And that's, we've got a lot of research looking at just that point. So we have people diagnosed with cancer, and we look at the people who are just below the line. So let's say we were talking about IQ, and let's say, Nathan, your IQ is 70, and my IQ is 69 based on these sorts of tests. Now, that would mean you're normal, and that would mean I have some cognitive deficiency. Although no one in their right mind would think there's a meaningful difference between 69 and 70. But when you're given the diagnosis, then everything becomes different. And it's the same thing and with all of these diseases. So, what is the point where here you can and here you can't? And I think that it's best for us to assume that there are no limits and go forward, and only then will we find that there are limits, if there are.
All right, our next is from Deborah Winslow Nutter. She loves the artwork in your slides and is wondering if they are yours or not.
Yes, they're mine. In my other life, I paint. So, which I suggest for those of you who don't know what to do with yourself during these times, when you're in the house that you've always said, gee, wouldn't it be nice to do? Now's the opportunity. Paint, write poems, write a memoir, take photographs of things around the house, make it artsy, make it realistic, clean the closets, do all the things that you've always thought you don't have time to do. And then see which things you enjoy. I mean, that's the main thing for companies to recognize, is that there are people who are working at home, from home, quite successfully and don't want to go back. What things do you miss at work? What things are you happy? One of the things I talk about when I do this for corporations is you have lots of these business gurus who talk about work-life balance, which to me is mindless. I think we should have work-life integration. You should be the same person whether at work or at home. And so now with so many people working from home, I think there's a greater chance for them to do that. And saying people who think that work has to be stressful. Well, if you're working from home, chances are it's not stressful. So what is it about that work, and how can you bring that to the workplace should you go back in a few months, next year, or whatever?
All right. Our next question is from Don Salerno. Does a major shift in our daily routines, like the one forced by the pandemic, help us be more mindful since our routines are disrupted?
Well,
looks like we got a little freeze in there. If you give us just one moment, we'll try to reconnect. There you go. We lost you for a little bit there. If you want to repeat your answer there for us.
Okay. So what was the question?
The question was, does a major shift in our daily routine?
Oh, yes, lead us to big shifts. It provides an opportunity, a wonderful opportunity. But the problem is that people think, they forget that the way they did things, decision, tradition, not because it was the best way. And so now that it's been disrupted, there are many people who are stressed about that, trying to figure out how to regain exactly what you had before, when the more mindful solution would be to recognize the way we arrange things, the way we were doing them was just one of many ways. Now let's see if we can go forward and take the good things that we had before and get rid of the bad, the things that build a more successful life or company or whatever it is that you're thinking of. That, change, big change, things that seem like catastrophes are typically opportunities, but they're only going to be opportunities if you look for them. So, for example, this company, a very big company, was trying to make a glue. They put all of their resources into making a glue. And then what happened is the glue failed to adhere. And stressed and depressed, unhappy, and feeling bad, the CEO of the company was. However, what they did was, instead of making a glue, they asked, what can you do with a substance that adheres for a short amount of time? And so what they did with that mistake, with that accident, with that error, was to create the Post-it note. 3M made far more money with the Post-it note, I believe, than it would have with another glue. So the point is that the way you did it might not be good. If you then try to repeat that, forgetting that that was just a decision, and you go forward using the information that you now have available to you, often the successes are greater than if you hadn't made the mistake in the first place.
All right, we've got about 6 more questions in the chat window, so we'll try to get through as many as we can. Our next question is from Luis Aloro. If we adhere to one practice for mindfulness, do we risk numbing out and becoming mindless? In other words, is variability in practice the key to experiencing novelty?
Well, it's not a practice. So what I'm suggesting, the reason another 30 slides that I could use to give you experience with your own mindlessness. So I'm hitting you over the head. How much is 1 and 1? No. How do you stop a car when it's skidding on? No. How do you add these numbers to get to 5? No. And after a while you come to see that the same experience that I have with horses don't eat meat, but the horse ate the meat. Okay, so once you get it, once you see, gee, things are changing, I don't know, and not knowing is good. Not knowing makes things exciting. Then you don't practice, you just are in that state. When you are convinced after enough experience, head, rather than the things you're evaluating, then you'd have to be silly to look at only the negative version of it, since it's all made up anyway. And when you found a way of doing something, then it's blocked. If you remember that was just a decision as to how to do it, and you say, how else might we do it? Then everything becomes new again, everything becomes exciting, and it's effortless. These drawing distinctions, I said at the beginning, is the essence of engagement. And that's what we all crave, to feel passionate about something, to be engaged. Things that we might do lead us to be exhausted. But even if you pay attention to me now, you know, most people, they start off, I don't know if you can see my finger because I'm looking at the little dot, but then they get tired and they wear down. For me, I start here and I just go, you know, so I can take questions all night. I know Nathan wouldn't allow it. Anne would have a fit, and I don't know what would happen to Victoria. But the point is that mindfulness is energy begetting. So doing this thing is good for you. Doing this thing feels good. And we have other data that people find you more charismatic, more attractive. The things that you do bear the imprint of your mindfulness. And I can give you, 5, 6 studies to show you that. So you feel better, you look better, people like you more, the things you do are better, you can take advantage of opportunities to which you'd otherwise be blind, you avert the danger not yet arisen. Other than the way you're first seeing them. To reframe something, sure. If you're brought up all your life thinking that this is an X, and then I come along and I tell you, well, it could also be, a Y, something different. You're still going to fight to see it as an X. I think that when you're unhappy and stressed, there's more motivation to look for the other side. When you're not doing as well as you would like to do, there's no other way of doing it. If I, let's say, when I give some of these talks, I'll look in the audience to see if there's a very big guy. I'm 5'3". I asked this guy to come to the stage. He's 6'7". So we look funny together. And then I raise the question, is there anything physical that we should do the same way? Hold a golf club, swing a baseball bat, play, hold a tennis racket, and so on. His hand I put next to mine, and it's 2-3 inches bigger. To get to is, the more similar you are to the person who created the rule, the better for you to follow that rule. Since you're not that person, it's never going to be as good as if you do it your own way. The more different you are, the more important it is to find your own way of doing it. So we have to ask ourselves the question we might have asked when we were 5, 6, 8 years old. Who said so? When someone says, this is how you do it, who said so? And under what? I find that if you do that and you pay attention to your abilities, to your likes and dislikes, that you'll find ways, all of us will find ways of making it our own.
All right, from Ruth Furman, is being
that wasn't shorter. I'm going to keep trying. All right, Ruth, what's your question?
Is being mindful all the time tiring?
No. Would it be tiring to be happy and laughing all the time? No. So I'm going to tell you a joke. This is my day job. But did you hear about the The clairvoyant midget that escaped from prison. There's a small, medium, at large. Okay, Nathan, you have to laugh. I can't see them. Okay, so the point is that as soon as a joke is funny, when you thought it was going one way, and then all of a sudden realize, oh, it has this other meaning as well. That's being mindful, that realization. So humor relies on that. All of the games we play, you know, even if you're doing a crossword puzzle, that, you know, it's fun, but if you just knew all the answers and you're doing, it's not fun. Okay, so this noticing novelty, creating novelty is the essence of what we think of as enjoyment. So all of our research suggests implicitly and then some explicitly that mindfulness is energizing, not enervating.
All right, we got another question from Srihan. What is the relationship between positive thinking and mindful thinking?
When somebody asked about optimism, it's the same thing, that being mindful isn't being positive or negative, it's just being. And if you're evaluating things and you choose to see the advantages of it, as long as you're choosing to see the advantages of it, then you're being mindful. If you actually think this thing is good and this thing is bad, then you're being mindless. So positive evaluation, all evaluation, or virtually all evaluation, tends to be mindless. As if that goodness or badness is in the event, in the person, in the activity. Nutters, I remember, who asked me about the art. If you think about art, you know, all of the impressionists, that those paintings that cost millions and millions of dollars today were all rejected in their day. I have a part of one of my books, I think it's the On Becoming an Artist book, showing how unpredictable things are, where it's all of these things that ways people were rejected, biggies, you know, like the Impressionists, that everybody now thinks are wonderful. So is it good or bad? Well, it depends on who's doing the evaluating, what the motivation is, what the circumstances are, and so on.
All right, our next question is, how do mindfulness practices such as yoga practice or body scans or mindful walking, practicing showering, brushing teeth mindfully, etc., how do those contribute to mindfully?
Okay, so first of all, you can watch television, do yoga, take a shower, whatever your example was, mindfully or mindlessly. All right, so it's not what you're doing, it's the way that you're doing it. Once you're doing it mindfully, then it's all basically the same. If that means noticing new things about it, being fully aware of the subtle changes in what you're doing or what you're saying or experiencing. You see how hard it is to change people. Everybody keeps talking about mindfulness as a practice because they're influenced by meditation or a yoga practice. This isn't a practice. This is a way of being. Once you get it, you just want to do it and be that way, because why not? Everything is better. You're energized. It's good for your health. People care more about you. You have more choices. You know, if you said to people, is choice good? Most people would say, yeah, choice is good. Oddly, if you say to them, is doubt good? They say, no, doubt is, you have doubt, but put that aside. Choices are good. The only way you can have choices is if you notice alternatives. So mindfulness leads us to opportunity to make choices. Choices leads us to be more mindful.
All right, so we have 1 minute left, so we'll wrap it up on a good note. I do have some other questions, so we can possibly email those over to you.
Nathan, do we have a hard finish? I mean, you're in your house, I'm in my house.
But I think it's just here in a minute or two. So we did have a question here from Elizabeth Larson. That's a great wrap-up question. If you could simplify takeaways, what would it be?
I've said them over and over again. What we want to do is exploit the power of uncertainty. accept that uncertainty is the rule. Not be afraid by uncertainty, because the outcomes we fear are in our heads, not in the events themselves. What we want to do is actively notice new things rather than assume that we know. And I guess I think this is going to be recorded so that we can play it over and over again and correctly recognize that 1 and 1 is not always 2, and so on. So what we need to do, most important, is understand uncertainty as something we're going to live with whether we want to or not, but in that we get to actually exert the control that we all seek. And I think the big thing with respect to health is all the work on mind-body unity. So anyway, I thank you for that question. And now tell me—
Ellen, we thank you for thank you a million. And thanks to everyone who came tonight and to ask very interesting questions. So,
well, this was fun. I hope everybody stays mindful and safe and healthy.
Thank you.
All right.
Okay.